I was just out of the military and moved back to my hometown after 10 years of service. My wife and I had found a starter home in a neighboring community, about 6 miles away from where I grew up. I had 2 children, a 5-year-old son and a newborn son. It wasn't a big house, so it didn't take us long to put our torches into it to make it our own. We had lived in this house for about 5 years when my wife started expecting again. A few months went by and our little girl was born. It was about this time that strange things started happening inside our quaint little home. One night while laying in bed, a music box started playing near a playpen we'd gotten our daughter. We both went out into the living room where we had set it up and just stood there watching this toy, lights flash and music play. It was playing A Small World after all. I picked it up and inspected it. It was not turned on. To not freak my wife out, I said the batteries are going dead. I took the batteries out and we went back to bed. Several weeks went by when we were laying in bed one evening and my infant daughter's bedroom light turned on. First thing I did was jump out of bed thinking it was one of my boys, but they were sound asleep. I blew it off as a switch that was faulty. I, at times, felt a primal or spiritual instinct that I wasn't alone, or even when nobody else was in the house. I finally had enough. I sat down with my wife and talked to her about this whole thing. She finally looked into my eyes and reluctantly said, "I've been seeing a little boy in the house, not ours." To her, he always seemed disappointed. I listened intently and then asked her if she was frightened. She said not too bad. After our conversation, I wondered in my mind if there was anything I could do to rid our house of this uninvited entity. I had recently been moved to third shift on my job. So when my wife was at work one day, I tried speaking to it and explained that it couldn't stay here anymore, thinking it was a ghost. It was quiet for a few days, but then things started ramping up. I actually started hearing strange vocal sounds, creepy ones. They didn't sound human. It's really hard to explain. So as the man and the protector of this family, I got pissed. This thing isn't leaving. Well, I'm a Christian man. A poor example at that, so I felt like this was not Casper the Friendly Ghost. I decided that it was probably demonic. Please don't take me wrong. I'm not a religious freak. I had to do something and do it now. I was just a pissed dad, and I was desperate. So a few days later, when we were all away again, I blew the dust off the Bible and read on how they handled this back in the day. I sat the Bible down, stood up, clenched my fist, and prayed for confidence and strength. Then proceeded to walk into every room in the house and proclaim that I am a child of God, I am saved by the sacrifice of Christ. You are commanded to leave. You cannot stay here anymore. My family is protected by Christ. Leave now. It was at that moment I felt a deep peace. I went on with my day. I had not told my wife a thing about it, and several weeks later I asked her, "Have you seen your little friend lately?" She replied, "I haven't seen or heard anything in several weeks." We lived there for another 15 years, and then actually moved to a bigger house in a neighboring town. And that is where story 2 comes in. The new house was much bigger, but it needed a lot of work. After weeks of painting and repair work, we finally moved in. My oldest son had moved out on his own, and my youngest son was now 19. My daughter was in junior high. Things were quiet and somewhat comfortable for the first year or so. My wife and I felt that it was the right choice. That is until one day my youngest boy said that he saw something in his room last night. He said it was an intense, bright light. It was there for a few seconds, then fizzled out, and it was at the end of his bed. I thought he was most likely dreaming. A couple other times he mentioned footsteps. Again, I thought he was dreaming. But upon mentioning that, he explained that this was during the day and he was playing video games. I still didn't pay too much attention after this, because he did have a history of overreacting. That is, until my daughter called me one day and said she heard a little girl laughing outside her bedroom door. At this time, she was on summer break. I continued to play it down, due to the fact that I haven't experienced anything. I may note, neither has my wife. Soon, both my kids were complaining about footsteps through the house. Always while they were alone. I continued to play it down until one evening, while standing in the kitchen, I got this overwhelming feeling that there was something at the end of our hallway. I ignored it as a creepy feeling. My son was standing in the kitchen as well, and he said, "Dad, there's something in the hallway, and it's looking into our sister's room." At first I was creeped out, and then my fatherly instincts filled my being. I was pissed. When I want guests, I will invite them. Meanwhile, I'm enraged. I told the kids to stay in the kitchen. I was reminded of the incident in the last house we lived in and proceeded to walk back into the dark hallway and move from room to room, confident in doing the same thing I did before would rid this thing once and for all. I felt like an uninvited person had just walked into my house and was messing with my children. With clenched fists and my faith, I proceeded. 8 years later, and this house is amazing. Nothing has happened since. My son ended up going to the military, and my daughter got married and moved to a small house in Indiana. And that brings me to part 3. As soon as my daughter and her husband got settled into the cute little house, I was relieved that she was happy and things were peaceful. Her husband was working a great job, although he was on thirds, and she's established in a good job and happy with it. My daughter had adopted 2 dogs, and they kept her safe and cozy at night. For a few weeks, things were peaceful, and it couldn't be better. My daughter would normally go to bed immediately after securing the house. She would go to the bedroom, shut the door, and have the dogs crawl in bed with her and watch some TV. 2 weeks into her little house, something started happening. She heard someone walking down the short hallway leading to the bedrooms. She opened the door, and no one was there. She told me about it, and I told her that it's most likely the refrigerator. It's an older model, and with my experience, they needed a new part. Besides, she's alone and her imagination may be playing tricks on her. She complained about this reoccurring nightly, but now the dogs were alerted whenever this would happen, and that got my attention. The last straw was the night the footsteps came down the hallway. Then the doorknob turned and jiggled, and her dog started growling. This happened after midnight, and I received a text. She told her husband, and he was creeped out as well, and I got pissed. I told her mom and I that I'm bringing them dinner tonight, so don't prepare anything. I told my wife what I was about to do. She agreed that something needed to happen. I didn't tell my daughter or son-in-law. I walked into the house. My wife went straight to the living room with our daughter and son-in-law, while I went to the back rooms. The house felt peaceful until I stepped into one of the bedrooms. It was very heavy, dark, and the atmosphere was very dense. It's hard to explain. I immediately stood tall, clenched my fist, and commenced to proceed to what I had learned many years earlier. I reminded whatever it was who I was, and I told it had to leave in the name of the Almighty. And just like that, from inside this room, I opened the door, and when I did, I saw my wife standing back by the back of the house. She was looking my way with eyes as big as golf balls. Without any prompting, she opened the door, and the house went peaceful, and is still to this day. As we were leaving the kids' house that day, I asked my wife why she had that look on her face. What she said really caught my attention and confirmed that I wasn't just imagining that feeling in that bedroom. She said, when you opened that door, I felt something go right through me, and I felt prompted to open the door to let it out. I am not a radical person. I'm not a religious zealot or charismatic. I'm just a simple man who loves his family. If I could have helped them in physical means, I could and would have. But this was different. I felt like the only thing to help in these situations was to draw upon my faith that has been stored up for a long time. It took me getting pissed to where I didn't care who or what it was. When a man is desperate to help and protect his family, he will do whatever it takes. The story is going to be slightly different. This is actually my story and what I experienced as a child. For some odd reason, I don't remember much about my childhood. But this story, this memory, is vivid, and I can recall each moment like it just happened yesterday. I couldn't have been any older than 5 at the time. My mom had remarried. Her, myself, and my stepdad had found a house in a small town. The house itself, I remember being an older home. Wasn't perfect by any means, but not a bad place to start. To paint you a mental picture, when you walked up the flight of stairs to reach the bedrooms, there's a T-shaped hallway. Immediately to your right would be the master bedroom, and a short walk to your left would be the other 2 adjacent bedrooms. I remember my bedroom being in the bigger of the 3, the one immediately to your right. I can still picture the giant red bunk bed, taking up a ridiculous amount of space. It had springs on the bottom, not a box spring, so it would creak loudly whenever laying down or getting up off of it. Every single night my mom would lay with me to comfort me and to help ease me to sleep. I know it's fairly normal for a young kid not to be able to sleep in their room, especially in a new environment. But there's something off though. Something I can't quite explain or put into words, but I always felt eyes on me. This heavy, uneasy feeling, and it was especially at night. My mom has told me multiple times how she would believe I was finally asleep, try to sneak off back to her room, but like I said, that spring was loud and groaned whenever any amount of weight would lift off of it. The moment she got off my bed, it would squeak loudly, and I would immediately shoot up, reaching out and asking, "Mom? Mom?" There would be occasions when I would fall asleep, and she would actually be able to sneak off back to her own bed. On these nights, I would immediately wake up in a panic when I realized I was alone, and my mom was no longer lying with me. I'd grab my blanket or a toy and sprint into their bedroom. Their bedroom was located on the left-hand side of the T. I'd climb up into their bed, place myself between them so I'd have a barrier and safety. Or at least what felt like safety on both sides of me. Slowly calm myself down and fall asleep not long after. This is where shit gets weird. Not only do I not understand these events, but I can't really explain it either. Not every single night this would happen, but a few times when I would spend between my parents, this did take place. I'd say at least twice a week. I'd wake up in a panic, breathing hard, and laying on my right side facing the bedroom door. The first thing I'd always take note of is that the door to the bedroom was halfway ajar and a small portion of the hallway light would be spilling into the room itself. I don't know why I was immediately scared, but I was completely drenched in fear from the moment I woke up, and it would progressively get worse as I took in my surroundings. The first thing I noted is that I couldn't move at all. I was paralyzed. The only thing I could move was my eyes. The second thing I would notice is that I was now alone in my parents' bed. My stepdad was no longer in front of me and my mom was no longer behind me. I knew this because the bed in front of me was empty and I could feel the edge of the bed on my back side. This obviously would crank up my fear even more and more. The next thing is definitely the worst part, and I really don't have an answer for, nor can I even begin to explain it. I would feel the back of my pajama shirt lift up, and someone would start to caress my back, sort of like a mother would try to do to soothe their child. I don't know how I knew, but I knew it wasn't my mother. It felt off and weird. In these moments, I would be completely drowning in fear and terror. As the tears would silently fall down my cheeks, I would cry myself to sleep. I'd shoot up awake later, still rattled from the events from the night before. Only now I was able to move freely. Most of the time it'd always be morning, and my mom and stepfather would be awake making breakfast or just doing things around the house. I remember being scared to ask my mom about it, but I do recall bringing it up a few times and she would shrug it off as a bad dream. It was not a dream. I am 100% certain of that. I don't remember much about my childhood, but this memory is cemented in my head. I can't recall happy memories or milestone things happening to me or our family, but I remember being paralyzed in fear while someone or something would rub my back like it was yesterday. This would happen a few times a week for a few years, and then all of a sudden it stopped. I still will have an occasional bad dream to this day, but who doesn't? I'm 31 years old, I still have no idea what that was or who that was. I'm writing and telling my story because I've kept it to myself for the most part all these years. Until a few months back, I overheard my younger brother talking about some weird experiences he's had in the house. It brought back all those memories flooding back to me as I realized that his bedroom was in fact the same bedroom where I lived out all those awful fucking nights. One day while driving home after picking him up, I told him everything that happened to me all those years ago. After I finished, he proceeded to tell me his side and everything he has experienced. This next part is what he went through. As of beforehand, I'd like to say that these stories are a bit lengthy, but stick with me. The first major encounter with an unwanted presence happened shortly after my 7th birthday. What I remember was going to my room and settling in bed. After a while of staring at the ceiling and avoiding bedtime itself, I grew tired. I was turning off my dim lamp that sat next to my bed before lying back in the bed. The room was dark and actually quite peaceful. I was extremely close to drifting off before I started to hear this startling noise. It was a crackling noise. As I opened my eyes, I sat up confused on what could be making this sound. As I began to listen closely, I realized that the sound was more like a scratching than crackling. I looked up and I was in complete shock. A skinny handprint was scratching itself into the wall, like the way some animals do when they get branded. This hand was branding itself onto the wall. It was a fairly faint handprint, but still extremely noticeable. The next thing I did was scream so loud my parents ran in, wondering what was going on. The scratching had stopped, and I told them what I heard and saw, but never mentioned anything about where the hand was located. My dad said it was just mice running through the walls before sending me back to sleep and retiring back to their bedroom. They never once asked me where the handprint was or even tried to investigate it. Why, I do not know. For a long time after that, though, I slept in my parents' room until I felt comfortable going back to my own room to sleep. However, I did always sleep with the nightlight on, hoping that whatever was would be scared of the light. The handprint was visible for a few months, and I remember only showing it to my closest friend. It's now completely faded and is completely invisible ever since we repainted the room. I still have no idea what that was or who it belonged to, but I know for sure that it wasn't just mice. I was 9 at the time and had grown out of using the nightlight when I slept. The memories of the handprint had stuck with me, however. I was slowly doubting what had happened and started feeding into the idea that it was in fact just mice. However, my strong doubt had come crashing down on this one night. This was an ordinary night. I had turned off the ceiling lights, leaving the room in shadowy and dark. I laid down and went to sleep rather quickly, quicker than I normally would. I had no need to waste time staring at the ceiling and avoiding bedtime because tonight I was actually tired. I fell asleep in what felt like minutes, and it could have been hours, but I didn't know. All I remember was opening up my eyes and staring up at a dark ceiling fan. I was lying flat, which gave me a good view of my room through my peripheral vision. I could barely see my dresser and my bookshelf in the corners of my room. My eyes darted from one to the other. There I could just slightly see an extremely skinny figure hunkering over my nearby dresser. My heart rate began to pick up, thinking that whatever left that headprint on the wall 2 years ago had come back to pay me a visit. I tried to squirm out of bed, but I couldn't move at all. I tried to move some more, but nothing helped. I was getting ready to lunge towards the doorway if I somehow freed myself from these invisible restraints. I looked back towards the figure and noticed something that made my stomach sink even further into my gut. One of this thing's long, dark-clothed, pale legs was now one step closer to the bed. Today I couldn't tell you what I was wearing, but back then I could list every detail. The figure was still hiding in the shadows, not revealing any gender or facial features, if it even had any at all. I shut my eyes so tight, trying to fall back asleep. A few small creaks in the floorboard let me know that whatever it was coming closer and closer. I kept my eyes tightly shut, trying my best to relax my mind and fall back asleep. I figured I could avoid it by just sleeping. The last thing I remember feeling was a cold, rough hand stroking my head once and very slightly. I avoided it the best I could, which was hard, but in about 5 minutes or so I was back asleep. The next morning I woke up to nothing in the corner. I could finally move my body and wasted no time getting out of that room. I later found out what had happened that night could have been sleep paralysis. If that's what it was, then I hope I never to experience it again. It was a one-time occurrence, and I hope it stays that way, as it hasn't happened since. A few months after the figure visited me and my sleep, I had resumed using the nightlight for obvious reasons. It was a Saturday morning, and it was just me and my dad home since my mom worked those mornings. I was upstairs drawing something and rewatching the first Harry Potter on my mom's laptop. I was finishing my drawing and it was near the end of the movie when I heard my dad opening the attic to the hallway. I heard the wooden ladder expand and touch the carpet below. He didn't go into the attic though, because there was no footsteps walking up the ladder. Being the curious kid I was, I walked out of my room and into the hallway. I always loved when my dad went into the attic because if you asked nicely, he might bring down some old toys or some other interesting items. I looked up the ladder to see that it was completely pitch black, which was highly unusual. If my dad ever went up to the attic, he'd turn on the bright lights that he had up there immediately after walking up. Maybe he wasn't up there, I thought, knowing that there were no footsteps, and went up there and the studio lights was off. I called up to him, asking what he was doing just to see if maybe my speculations were wrong. No response. I knew this was way beyond normal and didn't question him anymore, but instead I quickly hurried down the stairs. I checked all the downstairs rooms, determining that he wasn't in the house, and then I went to the garage to check, hoping that he'd be there. That was the last place he'd be. Thankfully, he was in there. I asked him if he went into the attic or planned on going up there because I heard the hatch opening. He said no, claiming to have been in the garage for the past hour. I didn't interrogate him anymore and walked back inside, keeping my eerie experience to myself. I didn't return upstairs until night came and it was time to go to bed, but I did momentarily glance up the stairs after coming back inside. When I looked up there, the hatch to the attic was shut and sealed, guaranteeing that nobody could have been up there. I didn't know if what had happened was real or not, and that maybe my mind was just playing tricks on me. I feel that whatever it was, imaginary or not, it sure got my attention. The last thing I'll mention is something that my friend said to me a long time ago at a sleepover. We were just sitting and watching TV when he randomly told me not to go to sleep early. When I asked him why, he said, "I don't like this house when I'm awake and everyone else is asleep." When I asked him what he meant by that, he said something that's always stuck with me. The house is more awake when everyone's asleep. I agreed with him, not showing him how much that sentence actually terrified me. We both just laughed it off, and that night I waited for him to fall asleep first. I think he's right though, and that house's sunrise was our sundown.